I never thought betrayal could carry a scent, but it does. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can smell it, the faint sweetness of a perfume that did not belong to me, that clung stubbornly to my husband's clothes long after he returned from one of his so-called business dinners. 40 years of marriage had taught me to notice the smallest changes, to sense the smallest lies. And yet I told myself for too long that I was imagining things that a loyal wife shouldn't doubt. But that night, as I sat in the kitchen with the clock ticking like a metronome of my unraveling life, I knew something inside me was shifting. My name is Juliet Roberts. I am 61 years old, a mother, a widow of trust if not in name, and the owner of a bakery chain that I built with my own hands, one loaf of bread at a time. For decades, my husband Julian was my partner in appearance, though never in work. He never kneaded dough until his arms ached, never stayed up past midnight frosting cakes for hotel orders. That was my world. His was the world of business dinners, phone calls, and the carefully cultivated image of a man who supported his wife's dream, or so I thought. That evening, when Julian tossed his jacket on the sofa and collapsed onto the bed without a word, the mixture of his cologne and the alien perfume was too strong to ignore. I moved about the house with the silent precision of a woman long accustomed to tidying up after a man who never noticed the effort. His wallet, his phone, his old laptop lay scattered on the table, and then I saw at his phone screen still glowing a new email open. Julian never used email. He always complained that technology was too complicated. But there it was, shining like a curse, daring me to look. I should have turned away. Instead, with trembling hands, I read the words that cracked open the ground beneath me. "You were incredible tonight, Dad." For a moment, I could not breathe. My heart froze as though someone had gripped it with icy fingers. The word Dad echoed in my head like a cruel chant. Who was calling him that in such a way so intimate, so filled with affection, that it pierced through my chest like a blade? I wanted to throw the phone against the wall to wake him up and scream, "Who is she? What are you hiding from me?" But I didn't. Instead, I placed the phone back exactly where I had found it, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I was terrified of knowing the truth, but more terrified of continuing to live inside a lie. Later, as I sorted through his clothes, a folded receipt slipped from his pocket. My stomach clenched when I read it. A fancy steakhouse in San Antonio. He had told me he was in Dallas. 2 meals. A bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon, the same wine he had bought for me on our 10th anniversary. A bottle I still remembered because of the tenderness in his eyes that night. A tenderness that no longer belonged to me. I laughed, then a bitter, broken laugh. I thought of all the times he had avoided trips to Dallas because he hated the traffic. But San Antonio was where his late mother had lived, a place he held close to his heart. Now it seemed he had carved out space there for someone else. I took a photo of the receipt and of the email. Evidence. Proof for a heart that didn't want to believe but knew it had to. Because after 40 years of marriage, a woman knows. She knows when love has been siphoned away, when secrets replace tenderness. Still restless, still searching. I went to the garage. His old SUV was still warm, humming with the ghosts of wherever he had been. I opened the glove compartment and found it an object so ordinary, yet it shook me to my core. A tube of personal lubricant. Used. Something we had not needed for years because intimacy between us had long withered. I stood there in the dim light, my hands trembling around that small tube, my stomach heaving as though I might be sick. My heart whispered the truth I didn't want to hear: Julian is cheating. I placed it back exactly as it was, wiping my hands furiously with a napkin as though betrayal itself could stain my skin. But I did not stop. I searched further and found crumpled napkins soaked with that same perfume that did not belong to me. That night, as Julian snored softly in the bedroom, his face calm, his body peaceful, I sat at the kitchen table with my phone in hand. Every photo I had taken burned into my vision. The receipt, the email, the lubricant, the napkins, each one another nail in the coffin of the life I thought I had. And yet a strange calm came over me. Rage, yes, but colder than fire. A determination I hadn't felt in years. I would know the truth. I would peel back the lies until nothing remained but the raw, ugly heart of it. The next morning, I reached out to an old friend, Mrs. Miller, who gave me the number of a private investigator named Thomas. He met me at a small cafe, his eyes calm, his presence steady. I handed him the flash drive with my photos, my voice quivering as I admitted, "I think my husband is cheating." Saying it aloud tasted like ash, like defeat, but Thomas didn't flinch. "I'll find the truth," he said. When his first report came in, my world shattered all over again. Julian wasn't with some stranger. He wasn't even with a woman I might have blamed and hated easily. No, he was with Allison, my daughter-in-law. I stared at the photos until my eyes blurred. Julian, my husband of 40 years, holding hands with the young woman I had welcomed into my family. Allison in a black dress smiling at him with lips painted red, leaning close to him in a way she never leaned toward my son Daniel. My son. Their deception wasn't just betrayal of me, it was betrayal of him too. I wanted to scream. I wanted to claw the images from my eyes, but I couldn't look away, because every photo, every video Thomas sent me was a truth I could not deny. Julian's eyes filled with tenderness he had not shown me in decades. Allison's laugh bright and cruel as though mocking everything I had believed about family. And then the final blow came not in pictures but in sound. Thomas recorded them one night. Allison's voice rang in my ears, venomous and sharp. "Dad, hurry up with that fake contract. I want that old hag out of the house." The old hag, that was me. Julian's voice followed, calm, confident. "Don't worry. Juliet trusts me too much." I sat alone in my bakery with that recording playing over and over, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped the phone. They weren't just betraying me with their bodies. They were plotting to take everything I had built. The bakery, my home, my life's work. The rage that rose in me then was not a wildfire but a steady flame. Controlled, determined. I knew what I had to do. I would not scream. I would not confront him with words. I would answer betrayal with something sharper, something unforgettable. The night Julian left his keys unattended, I crept into the garage. My hands found that same tube of lubricant in the glove box. I held it in my hand for a long time, feeling the weight of every sleepless night, every sacrifice I had made for him, every moment of tenderness he had squandered. Then, with deliberate patience, I replaced its contents with industrial superglue. Drop by drop until the tube was filled with something that would bind, not release. When I placed it back into the glove box, I felt an eerie calm. This was not madness. This was justice. A wife's justice after 40 years of deceit. What happened next would change everything for him, for Allison, for Daniel, for me. It was the kind of truth you could not hide, not behind lies, not behind charm, not behind family dinners and polite smiles. The kind of truth that scorched away every mask. And I, Juliet Roberts, would be the one to reveal it. The morning after I switched the tubes, I moved through the house like a ghost. My hands kneaded dough at the bakery before sunrise, but my mind was elsewhere, clinging to the hidden trap I had set. The scent of yeast, sugar, and vanilla scents that had always comforted me now carried the weight of anticipation. Each press of the dough against the wooden counter was not just for bread, but for vengeance. Julian had no idea. He moved about the house as though everything was the same, sipping his coffee, patting my shoulder absent-mindedly, offering the hollow tenderness of a man who thought his lies were still hidden. But I saw it. The flicker in his eyes when I mentioned traveling to Nashville for a business contract. Relief, not worry. He wanted me gone. He wanted me out of the way so Allison could slip into my home without fear. I smiled at him, then a small smile he mistook for trust. Inside, my blood burned like molten metal. He thought he was playing me, but it was I who had already dealt the first hand. That night, I lay in bed, feigning sleep, my breathing slow, my body still. Julian shifted beside me, then rose quietly, his footsteps soft but not soft enough for my sharpened ears. From behind the heavy curtain in the living room, I listened as he spoke into his phone in a whisper. "Yes, of course. Come over tomorrow. Juliet has to leave for Nashville. We'll have the house to ourselves." Then a giggle. Allison's voice light and cruel. "Finally." We can relax without sneaking around. I pressed my hand against my mouth, swallowing the scream that rose inside me. I wanted to rush out to claw the phone from his hand and shout, "This is my house. This is my life. How dare you defile it with her?" But I didn't. I forced myself to stay still, to be silent. Patience was my weapon now. When he returned to bed, his body heavy and satisfied with his secret, I reached quietly into my drawer and pulled out Daniel's old recorder. I had given it to him years ago when he started college, so he could record his lectures. Now it would serve a darker purpose. I set it behind the bookshelf near the headboard of our bed, disguised beneath a family photograph of Daniel and Allison's wedding. Their smiles, once symbols of joy, now mocked me from behind the glass. The next morning I rose early, feigning a trip. I shook Julian's shoulder gently, whispering that I had to catch the bus for Nashville to sign a contract. His eyes barely opened. "All right, be careful," he mumbled before burying his face into the pillow. He didn't even kiss me goodbye. Instead of boarding a bus, I crossed the street with my purse and knocked on Mrs. Peterson's door. She frowned when she saw me. "Juliet, you're leaving this early?" I shook my head softly. "Not exactly. I need to watch something unfold." She didn't ask more, just gave me a seat by her front window from where I could see my own house clearly. She poured me coffee, her wrinkled hand squeezing mine with silent understanding. She had always been a sharp woman, and I think she knew without words that today something would shatter. Hours passed slowly. My heart pounded with every tick of the clock, my palms damp even as I tried to sip the bitter coffee. Then just after 10, a taxi pulled up in front of my house. Out stepped Allison, dressed in a floral dress that tried to hide her guilt, but only made her look more like the pretender she was. Dark sunglasses covered half her face, as if plastic lenses could disguise betrayal. Julian opened the door, peering around like a thief before ushering her inside. My jaw clenched. My fingers tightened around the porcelain cup until I thought it might shatter. I slipped my headphones in and tapped the app connected to the recorder I had hidden. Through the static came their laughter, their footsteps echoing through the home I had built. Then Julian's voice, deeper than usual, almost giddy. "We don't have to sneak around anymore. And Allison, cruel as ever, the old hag is gone. This is perfect." The old hag. That was what she called me. I closed my eyes against the sting of it, breathing slowly, forcing myself not to storm across the street and tear her from my sheets. Instead, I waited. Moments later, her shriek rang in my ears. "Julian, what the hell is this? We're stuck!" I smiled grimly, sipping the last of my coffee as though nothing extraordinary were happening. "Just a little longer," I whispered to myself. Then I pulled the string I had rigged to the stove the night before. The skillet of oil burst into flame, sending black smoke curling out of the kitchen window. Mrs. Peterson gasped beside me, clutching her chest. "Juliet, your house, it's on fire." Outside, neighbors began shouting, pointing, running. "Call the fire department, Juliet's house is burning." I kept my expression calm, almost mournful, but inside I was steady as stone. Everything was going exactly as planned. Within minutes, the fire truck's siren wailed through the neighborhood. My chest tightened when I saw who leapt from the driver's seat: Daniel. My son. My boy, dressed in his fire chief uniform, commanding his men with urgency. His voice, always so full of pride for his family, now sharp with duty. "Break down the door. There may be people inside." My heart cracked then, not for Julian or Allison, but for Daniel. For the truth that was about to destroy him. But I stayed still. This was a wound that had to bleed before it could scar. The firefighters stormed into the house. Through the recorder, I heard the chaos: Allison's sobs, Julian's curses, their frantic struggle. And then Daniel's voice, trembling with disbelief. "What? What is this?" A firefighter muttered, shocked. "Oh my God." Another stifled a laugh. But Daniel's voice roared above them. "Silence!" I closed my eyes, picturing the scene. My son staring at his wife and his father glued together in the bed where Julian and I had once shared our lives. His face pale, his heart shattering, his pride collapsing under the weight of their betrayal. Neighbors crowded the yard. Whispers rippled through them like waves. "It's Julian and Allison," someone cried. The father-in-law and daughter-in-law. Disbelief, disgust, pity. Every voice was a knife carving away what little dignity Julian and Allison might have clung to. Firefighters wrapped them in sheets, carrying their fused bodies out on stretchers. Allison sobbed uncontrollably. Julian's voice cracked with desperation. "Don't let anyone see us!" But it was too late. The entire neighborhood had seen. Phones were raised, cameras flashing, whispers spreading like wildfire. And Daniel, my son, stood frozen in the yard, his face ghostly white, his arms slack at his sides. He could not move. He could not speak. He had lost his wife, his father, and the foundation of his family, all in a single unbearable moment. I wanted to run to him then, to hold him, to whisper that I was sorry. But I stayed in the shadows of Mrs. Peterson's porch, my heart torn between grief and grim satisfaction. The ambulance finally carried them away, sirens wailing, while laughter and whispers followed in its wake. Disgraceful. Unbelievable. Poor Juliet. I walked with Mrs. Peterson to the hospital, feigning shock, my expression carefully constructed. Inside, though, I carried the weight of 40 years of pain and a justice I could not undo. When the doctor told me they had managed to separate Julian and Allison, that there was no permanent damage, I nodded politely. But I had already prepared my next act. With quiet precision, I swapped the ointments the nurse gave me for tubes of mustard hidden in my purse. Minutes later, their screams echoed down the hospital corridor as the burns spread across their skin. Nurses rushed, patients peeked from their doors, and whispers filled the air once more. The humiliation was complete. The punishment had only begun. The hallway outside their hospital room was a storm of whispers. Patients leaned against door frames, nurses traded glances, and even strangers shook their heads as though they were witnessing a parable, not real life. The father-in-law and the daughter-in-law, stuck together, humiliated. That phrase hummed through the air like an accusation. I stood there, my purse heavy on my arm, my heart hammering inside my chest. The doctor's words still rang in my ears, no permanent damage. I nodded, smiled faintly, and thanked him, though my thoughts were already racing ahead. When the young nurse handed me the ointments, her eyes softened with pity. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. This must be very difficult." Difficult, if only she knew. My fingers, calm despite the rage in my blood, slid the mustard tubes from my purse into the place of the real ointment. It was a cruel trick, yes, but cruelty was what Julian and Allison had chosen when they plotted to strip me of my family, my bakery, my home. If they had decided to paint me as the fool, then let the world see the truth of what they were instead. When I entered their room, Allison was curled on the bed, her hair a tangled mess, mascara streaking down her face. She looked nothing like the polished woman who had walked into my home hours before. She wouldn't even meet my eyes. Julian, pale and shaken, tried to sit up straighter, his voice trembling. "Juliet, I can explain." Explain. As if there were words that could untangle what I had seen, what Daniel had seen. I placed the ointment tubes on the side table and cut him off with a tone so cold it didn't even sound like my own. "No, Julian. You don't explain. You made your choice, and so have I." His mouth hung open, but no sound came. Allison whimpered, clutching the sheet around her as though it were a shield. I turned without another word and left the room. Minutes later, their screams erupted. "It burns, God, it burns!" Allison's wailing carried down the hallway like a banshee's cry. Julian cursed and roared, his voice breaking as nurses rushed in, alarmed and confused. I stood outside listening, my expression carefully schooled into concern. But inside, I was stone. The humiliation was irreversible. Their faces were now burned into the memory of every doctor, every nurse, every patient on that floor, not with fire, but with disgrace. I didn't have to wait long before Daniel appeared. His shoulders hunched, his face carved in exhaustion. He carried a thick folder in his arms. I had called him as soon as the ambulance took them away, asking him to retrieve the envelope of evidence and the divorce papers I had hidden. He didn't say a word as he handed it to me. His gaze was empty, hollow, like a man who had lost not just a wife but the trust of blood. Together we stepped into the hospital room. Julian looked up, his face pale, his hands trembling, his lips moving as though he wanted to speak. Allison kept her face buried in the sheets, unable to face me, unable to face Daniel. I opened the folder and spread the papers on the table beside them. Photos of Julian and Allison at the hotel, at the lawyer's office, on the balcony, kissing, holding each other like lovers. Every detail captured, every lie destroyed. and on top of the pile I placed the divorce documents. 40 years of marriage end here, I said quietly, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. Sign these, then disappear. From my life, from Daniel's life, from this house, from this family. Julian's hands shook. Juliet, please! Don't, I snapped. My voice echoed in the sterile white walls of the hospital. Don't say a word. You chose her. You chose betrayal. Now you live with it. Live with... Allison broke down completely sobbing, clutching at Daniel with desperate hands. Honey, please. Forgive me. I made a mistake. I love you. Please don't let me go. But Daniel's face hardened into stone. He pulled his arm away as if her touch burned. No, he whispered, his voice hollow. No, Allison, don't ever speak to me again. He turned and walked out, his shoulders rigid, his steps heavy. I looked at Julian one last time. The man I had loved since I was a girl in San Diego. The man who had promised me eternity now sat in a hospital bed, exposed as a liar, a thief, a coward. He reached for me, his voice desperate. Juliet, don't leave me. I didn't mean for this. I pulled my hand back as if his skin were poison. Don't speak my name again. You lost the right. The nurse rushed in, her eyes darting between the chaos and me. Please keep it down. This is a hospital. I turned on my heel and walked out, my heart thundering, my eyes dry. There were no tears left, only resolve. Daniel was waiting in the hallway, his head buried in his hands. His broad shoulders shook silently. I placed my hand gently on his back. For a moment he didn't move. Then in a voice so broken it nearly shattered me, he whispered, "Why, Mom? Why did it have to be Dad? Why her?" I pressed my forehead to his shoulder, holding him as tightly as I could, sharing the weight of his pain. There were no words that could answer him. There never would be. In that moment I understood something painful, but clear. Julian and Allison had not only destroyed themselves, they had destroyed us. Our family would never be whole again. Days turned into weeks, and the scandal spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. The video Mrs. Peterson had recorded Julian and Allison carried out on stretchers, their faces twisted with shame, circulated faster than I could have imagined. Neighbors whispered in grocery aisles, shook their heads in pity, at church muttered their disgust at the bakery. And yet the bakery thrived. Customers poured in their words tinged with sympathy and admiration. Juliet, you are such a strong woman. We're proud of you, holding your head high. You defended your family's honor. I smiled politely, handed them pastries, thanked them for their kindness. But strength, no. What they called strength was nothing more than a woman piecing herself back together from shards of her broken heart. At night, Daniel sat across from me at the kitchen table, his face pale and tired. He ate in silence, pushing food around his plate. I longed to hear his laugh again, the laugh that had filled our house with joy for so many years. But instead, silence became our companion. Mom, he said one evening, his voice rough, I want to stay here, for a while, help with the bakery, keep you company. I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. Of course, Daniel. This will always be your home. He nodded, eyes cast down, and just like that, the two of us became all that was left. I tried to remind myself of small joys, the scent of fresh bread in the morning, the soft laughter of customers, the way Daniel's voice softened when he asked me to make flan on the weekend, a taste of happier days. But every time I looked at him, I saw the wound that Julian and Allison had carved into him, and I wondered if it would ever heal. Still, I clung to what I had left, my bakery, my son, myself. And if the world wanted to call me strong, then maybe I could learn to believe it. The weeks that followed were like waking up after a storm. The sky looked calm, the streets were quiet, but the wreckage was everywhere if you knew where to look. Inside me there were still broken beams, shattered windows, walls that could never be repaired. Julian and Allison vanished from the neighborhood. After the hospital, they disappeared like disgraced ghosts, too humiliated to show their faces. I heard whispers. They had fled the city, hiding from the shame that clung to them like tar. Some said Julian tried to convince relatives to take him in. Others claimed Allison begged Daniel to reconsider, but he had blocked her number and burned every photo of her. Whatever the truth, they were gone, and the silence they left behind was its own kind of punishment. But their absence didn't mean peace. It meant I had to face the reality of what was left. The bakery became my refuge and my prison all at once. The little bell over the door rang from morning until evening, more customers than I had ever seen before. Some came for pastries, yes, but others came out of curiosity, whispering to each other as they stole glances at me. Juliet Roberts, the betrayed wife. Juliet Roberts, the strong woman who fought back. Juliet Roberts, whose husband had been caught with her own daughter-in-law. I learned to keep my chin high as I tied ribbons on boxes of flan, even when the whispers cut deep. Strength wasn't a choice, it was a mask I had to wear. Behind it, I was still bleeding. Daniel was by my side every morning now. He set up deliveries, took calls, spoke to clients with a calm professionalism that hid the hollow look in his eyes. At night, he would sit across from me in the kitchen, staring at his food in silence. I could feel the weight on him, the image of his father and his wife burned into his memory like a scar that would never fade. One evening, he spoke without looking up. "Mom, do you think I'll ever be able to trust again?" I reached across the table and took his hand, squeezing it tight. His hands were rough, calloused from years as a firefighter, strong enough to pull strangers from burning buildings. Yet they trembled under my touch like those of a child. "Yes," I whispered. "One day. Not today. Not tomorrow. But one day. Trust is like dough, Daniel. It takes time. It has to be worked, rested, handled with patience. And sometimes it rises again when you thought it never would." His lips trembled into the faintest smile, but his eyes were still clouded. That night, after he went to bed, I cried quietly at the kitchen sink, my tears mixing with the dishwater, because I wasn't sure if I even believed my own words. Still, I tried to give him fragments of the life we once had. On Sundays, I made flan, our family's dessert, the one I had once taught Allison how to make. Daniel stirred the caramel with me, his hands steadying mine, as though we were teaching each other to hold on. When we sat down to eat it, his eyes softened just a little, and for the first time since everything shattered, I heard him laugh, just a small laugh, but it was enough to remind me that healing was possible. I also began to carve out space for myself. For decades, I had been the wife, the mother, the baker. Now, with so much taken from me, I decided to reclaim what remained. I joined a cooking club at the community center. Women my age gathered every Thursday, bringing recipes, stories, laughter. When I brought trays of flan, their eyes lit up, and one woman clapped me on the shoulder. "Juliet, you make the best flan in the neighborhood. You should be teaching us." I smiled, truly smiled, for the first time in what felt like years. Sharing recipes was different from sharing grief. Recipes healed, they connected. On Sundays, I began attending church again. Not for Julian, not even for Allison, for myself. I would sit in the pews as the light streamed through stained glass windows, washing me in color. I prayed not for revenge, not for justice. Those had already come. I prayed for Daniel, for strength, for peace, for the courage to keep moving forward when everything inside me wanted to collapse. And slowly, piece by piece, I began to find myself again. Neighbors who had once whispered pity now approached me with respect. Mrs. Peterson, my quiet ally, often walked with me in the town square. Her words were blunt, but kind. "Juliet, the whole neighborhood still talks about Julian and Allison, but they don't talk about them as people anymore. They talk about them as a story, a warning. And you're the one who won." I only smiled, because winning felt like ashes in my mouth. How could I call it victory when the price was my family? But I understood what she meant. I had survived. Survival perhaps was its own kind of triumph. One evening, Daniel came home later than usual. He was still in his firefighter's uniform, his face smeared with soot. He sat heavily at the kitchen table, his eyes red. "Mom, we pulled a child out of a burning apartment today," he whispered. "He lived." Tears filled my eyes, not from sadness, but from pride. "That's because of you, Daniel. You save people, even when you can't save yourself." He looked at me, then really looked at me, and for the first time in months there was light in his eyes. "You're the strong one, Mom, not me." But he was wrong. His strength was different, yes, but it was there. And I knew that one day, when his wounds had scarred over, he would find love again, real love, one that didn't betray him. As for me, I no longer dreamed of rebuilding a family with Julian. That chapter was closed, burned and buried. Instead, I dreamed of mornings in the bakery with the smell of bread rising warm in the air of afternoons, at the cooking club of evenings sitting with Daniel as the quiet filled the house. It wasn't the life I had once imagined, but it was life. And sometimes that was enough. Still, there were nights when the loneliness crept in, when the silence of the house felt too heavy, when I stared at the empty side of the bed and remembered the man Julian once was. The boy who had kissed me under the San Diego sky, who had promised me forever. I mourned him, even as I hated the man he became. Because grief is not simple. It clings even to the undeserving. But every time those memories threatened to break me, I reminded myself he chose this. He chose her, and I chose survival. The bakery bell still rings. Customers still smile. Daniel still eats flan with me on Sundays. And I, Juliet Roberts, am still here. Not as the old hag Allison mocked, not as the fool Julian deceived, but as a woman who endured, who fought back, and who found herself in the ashes of betrayal. And maybe, just maybe, that is enough. Months turned into seasons, and life, though forever altered, continued its slow march forward. The bakery became the heartbeat of my days again, the smell of bread and sugar a constant that anchored me, even as my soul still trembled from the storm of betrayal. The ovens hissed, the dough rose, and customers came and went, many of them still whispering in quiet awe at what I had endured. But inside, my heart had changed. I was no longer the Juliet who moved through life with blind trust in her husband, who clung to the illusion of family unity. That woman had been shattered the moment I saw the photographs of Julian and Allison on that hotel balcony. In her place stood someone else, a woman tempered in fire, hardened by loss, but not destroyed. Daniel was the proof of that. He stayed with me not just out of duty, but out of something deeper, a need to heal in the presence of someone who shared his pain. He became my shadow in the bakery, my partner in the rhythms of daily life. His voice, once bright with jokes and laughter, was quieter now, but steady. Together we found new rituals, small comforts that stitched our days together. Every morning he carried the flour sacks for me just as Julian once had in those early days. And when I teased him gently, saying, "Don't strain yourself, Daniel. I'm not that old yet," he gave me a small smile, the kind that reminded me he was still my son, the boy I had raised even if grief had carved him into a quieter man. Sometimes when the bakery grew busy, he would glance at me across the counter and nod a silent promise that no matter how much we had lost, we would never lose each other. Those small gestures, more than grand declarations, carried me through. Still, the shadows lingered. At night, when I lay alone in bed, I sometimes thought of Julian not with longing, but with a kind of cold bewilderment. How could he throw away 40 years, the life we built, the son we raised, for something so shameful, so fleeting? I would replay those words I had heard on the recording. Juliet trusts me too much. Trust twisted into a weapon. I realized then that trust, when given to the wrong person, can be as dangerous as a blade. But trust in yourself, that is the foundation no one can take. The community's reaction shifted with time. At first I was pitied, then I was admired, and eventually I became something else entirely, a symbol. Women came to me quietly after buying their pastries, leaning over the counter as though confessing secrets. "Juliet, my husband hasn't come home on time in weeks. Juliet, I think my daughter-in-law is hiding something. Juliet, how did you know? How did you find the courage?" I didn't have easy answers. I could only tell them the truth, that courage doesn't arrive like lightning. It creeps in slowly, through nights of crying, through mornings when you can't get out of bed but do anyway. Through the simple, stubborn act of surviving. Sometimes when I saw the haunted look in their eyes, I recognized myself. Betrayal leaves a mark that never fully fades. But I told them what I told Daniel. You are stronger than you think. You will not break. You will bend and you will rise again. And maybe in helping them, I was helping myself. One evening, months after everything, Daniel and I sat on the porch after closing the bakery. The sunset painted the sky orange and pink, the colors soft against the wounds still etched in our hearts. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his eyes on the horizon. "Mom," he said quietly. Do you ever regret it? What you did? The revenge. I thought of the tube of glue, the smoke trap, the humiliation that spread across the neighborhood like wildfire. I thought of Allison's sobs, Julian's desperate curses, Daniel's broken whisper of why her. I thought of the mustard tubes and the screams that echoed in the hospital hallways. Did I regret it? Perhaps. Perhaps not. I turned to him, my voice steady. Daniel, I don't regret defending what was mine. I don't regret exposing the truth. But revenge, it doesn't heal you. It doesn't bring back trust or laughter or love. It only shows the world who they really are. And sometimes that's all you can do. He nodded slowly, his jaw tight, as though he was trying to accept something that still burned inside him. I don't want to become bitter like them. I reached over and took his hand. You won't. Because bitterness eats away at you. But you, I squeezed his hand. You still know how to love. Even if you don't believe it yet. The cicadas hummed in the evening air, and for a moment, silence wrapped around us like a fragile kind of peace. I didn't know what the future would hold. Maybe I would live the rest of my days in the bakery, kneading dough and sharing recipes with women at the community center. Maybe Daniel would find love again, real love, one that honored him. Maybe the whispers about Julian and Allison would fade into mere gossip, a cautionary tale told in hushed voices. But I knew one thing with certainty: I would never again allow myself to be silenced. Never again would I place blind trust in someone who did not earn it. My life was my own now, bruised but unbroken. And so, to those of you listening to my story, I say this. Betrayal is a fire. It can burn you to ashes if you let it. But if you stand in the flames long enough, you will emerge tempered, stronger, sharper. And though the scars remain, they are proof that you survived. Don't let anyone convince you that you are weak for feeling pain. Don't let anyone make you believe you are a fool for having trusted. The shame belongs to those who betray, not to those who love. As for me, I will keep baking. I will keep loving my son. I will keep living. Because that is the truest revenge, not destruction, not bitterness, but survival. If my story has touched you, if it has made you think of your own wounds, your own scars, I ask you to share it. Leave me a comment. Tell me where you are listening from. Tell me what you've endured. Tell me how you've survived. I want to know. I want to hear your voices. And if you want to hear more stories like mine, stories of betrayal, resilience, and the strength we find in the ashes, please like this video, share it with others who might need it, and subscribe to my channel. Your support means more than you can imagine. Together we can remind each other that even in our darkest nights, we are not alone.